So, in your practices, what have you seen as the top reasons that conflict arises?
Welcome to the Kickass Couples Podcast. This is the place where we help committed couples who want to level up their marriage experience newfound clarity, hope, and confidence. We're Matthew and Kim, co-hosts and husband and wife.
In 26 years together, we've seen a lot and never thought it could be as good as it is right now. We're here to help you successfully navigate the messy, dirty, and wonderful world of marriage.
We believe all couples deserve and are capable of experiencing an extraordinary and fulfilling marriage. And each week, we're bringing you life lessons from real-life successful couples to help you grow and strengthen your relationship.
And now, back to the show.
Are you tired of feeling like your relationship is on the hamster wheel of conflict and arguments? Do you want to learn how to navigate conflict and even be proactive about minimizing it? Join Matthew and me, along with our team of relationship experts, as we help you reframe disagreements and look at them as an opportunity to learn and grow in your intimacy. We understand how frustrating it can be when conflicts arise in your relationship, but fear not. Our experts share tools and skills to help you reduce and even eliminate those pesky roadblocks and intimacy killers. Estrella ROGERS is a multi-skilled professional with certifications in play therapy, clinical social work, and IBHC. She is a relationship coach, author, speaker, and owner of Without Limits Counseling Services. With 15 years of experience, she specializes in Gottman Method Couples Therapy and offers services on local and international scales. Natalie Southward is a licensed mental health counselor in Florida and a member of the American Counseling Association and Florida Mental Health Counselors Association. With over 18 years of experience, she offers 5-hour and 8-hour individual and/or marital intensives, specializing in accelerated resolution therapy and brain spotting. She is trained in Gottman Couples Therapy and teaches 7 principles for making marriage work and bringing baby home. Natalie is passionate about helping others and believes she is called to be an agent of change. So buckle up for an exciting journey to a happier, healthier, and more fulfilling relationship. Let's learn how to hit the gas and leave those conflicts in the rear view mirror.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Kickass Couples Podcast. We have a special episode today on how to reduce and eliminate conflicts in your relationships. When we start a relationship or we get married, everything seems rosy and hunky-dory. We're in love and we can't possibly imagine what might go wrong. Then the challenges and stressors of life seem to creep in and we really are wondering what happened to that bliss we seem to have in the beginning. And this happens for some people when they just start a relationship. This happens to people when they've been in a relationship for 20 years. So to get into some of these issues and talk to you about what you can do to help eliminate conflict and arguing in your relationship, we have our panel today with Estrella ROGERS and Natalie Southward. So welcome back to the Kickass Couples Podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are glad, Kim, these ladies are alumni.
They are.
We're having a little alumni day here on the Kickass. These are repeats because they were so kick-ass the first time. We said, we got to get these ladies back.
Go girls.
Exciting.
We're fun to dive in with this to you guys today.
Well, I want to start us off with a quote that Matthew found, and he found it from Your Tango. And it says, if you want a relationship that looks and feels like the most amazing thing on earth, you need to treat it like it's the most amazing thing on earth. And I couldn't agree with that more. But we all know that life happens and stressors get added to our lives. And listen, conflict is a normal part of every relationship, right? It's going to happen in any healthy relationship. But when it becomes a pattern or it becomes aggressive, then we're really mismanaging it and we're doing some harm to our relationship. So my first question, and I'm going to address it to you, Natalie, is it possible for couples to drastically eliminate conflict in their number one human relationship? Is it
I think it's possible for them to reduce it. I believe conflict is a part of relationship. We can grow through conflict. It's when it turns to arguing and degrading one another is when it becomes an issue. I learned a lot about my husband through conflict. I've learned a lot about my best friends, coworkers, but it's how you handle it, right? It's the conflict resolution piece that we want to focus on. And if you focus on conflict resolution and fair fighting rules, the conflict's not going to escalate, and it's not going to feel like it's a lose-lose situation, right? So, but I believe couples can reduce it based off of the skills that they really work on honing in that's going to speak to their partner's heart versus speaking at them. So my goal as a clinician is to help reduce it and help them have healthy conflict resolution and to fight fair.
right?
Yeah.
And Estrella, would you have anything to add to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I would, so one, everything Natalie said, but then also adding, really understanding also like their triggers, understanding their patterns, understanding just really who they are. And I think a lot of times when we talk about conflict, we don't really look at the other person's perspective. We don't take the time to really see how are they seeing the situation. And a lot of times if we're able to do that, then you're able to actually see the situation with more of an open mind. And you're willing to really hear them and just be able to say, okay, so if this is your experience, this is where you're coming from, then now we can talk about this and we can really just really form more of an understanding. So I think a big piece of it is just really trying to understand your person, understand who they are, their experiences, where they're coming from, even in the conflict. And I think that helps you to really, just be able to manage it even better, just like Natalie said, it's going to happen, but how are we managing it?
Right.
Sure. So looking at it, I hear you both saying you're really looking at it as an opportunity to grow and learn more about that person.
And I think you each did two concepts. I'm going to come back at both of you because you gave us some great nuggets there. Natalie, I've heard the term and we've talked about it before, fighting fair. So I'd love for you and Estrella to give me saying, okay, so fighting is okay as long as it's not, I heard you say, as long as it's not nasty and degrading. If we're trying to hurt the other person, that's an issue, but conflicts and disagreements are going to come up. So how do you, tell us, what do we need to do? What are the rules that need to be on the table so that fighting is fair and loving and it's effective as opposed to destructive?
So first off, you have to ask yourself, why am I upset? Not why is my partner upset? Is he not listening? Is she not listening? It's, well, first of all, why do I feel so upset? Right? What is it about this situation that's triggering me? So I talk about being attuned to your body. We have the greatest alarm system in our body, our rapid heart rate. We might sweat. Some people clench their teeth or pace when they're upset. Well, what is that about? Right? So first of all, why am I upset? And then addressing one issue at a time versus just that snowball word vomit, I like to call it, where you're just like word vomit this issue and that. And now I have a reason to fight and I'm going to just unload everything at once versus there's one issue. I'm going to address the one issue at a time. No degrading language. Right? I always recommend if you have a term of endearment to your partner, to your significant other, use a term of endearment, even in conflict. It works with families, with coworkers, where it's, if you are on a friendly basis, and we've talked about this before, my husband never says Natalie. The only time he ever says Natalie is if he's upset, right? Like Natalie. And I'm like, what, Eric? Because we always speak in terms of endearment. And so in conflict, that is something we are very conscientious about. So no degrading, no cursing at each other. Try to keep it at a lower level. Some people do have conflict and it's elevated and it doesn't affect them. But if it affects your partner, then it's something to be aware of and to be in control and or walk away to have a timeout, which is a key phrase, timeout. Right. So a lot of times people think of it as punishment, but a timeout in sports. So I played basketball my whole life. My husband still plays to this day. And a timeout was a reset. Right. It was to get the team together, the coach, hey, here's our game plan, take a break, here's some water. It's the same in a relationship. So fighting fair requires you to take a time out if you continue to loop around the topic over and over again. Another way is, I always say, attempt to compromise, right? Create a win-win, and have a heart of curiosity. So that helps in fighting fair. But key is address one issue at a time, attack the problem, not the person. Let's attack this problem versus my partner. Because right there, you're already setting it up for a major argument.
Sure.
Yeah.
Estrella, what kind of rules would you think that we should throw into the fighting fair concept?
Yeah, I think so. It's really interesting listening and just kind of really kind of looking at like different perspectives. But I think really sitting down and really looking at when you are fighting, again, looking at their perspective, but asking why. So really asking the questions of, why do you feel that way? Let me know, like, what do your values say about this situation? Really digging into the situation. And I know Natalie used the word attune, but really being able to do that in the middle of conflict, and because when you're having conflict, that means that we have two opposing views normally. And so why do you have the view that you have? Why is this important to you? And so again, just really taking the time to really understand and ask those deeper questions, understanding why your partner feels the way that they feel. Because again, if I can tune into that part, then number one, I'm willing to compromise with you a little more. If I know why you feel the way you feel and I understand just where you're coming from. And so I think a big piece of it is understanding. It's when we do the Gottman, like the Rappaport intervention, and Natalie was saying, really just focusing on one issue at a time. A lot of times, we'll have our clients, they'll write down what the other person is saying while the other person is speaking. And I love that because it slows them down just enough. So that way, when they're speaking, I'm not thinking of a rebuttal. I'm concentrating on what you're saying in that moment, which really gives me the opportunity to just hone in and be able to focus and listen and hear what you're saying. And so I think when we talk about conflict, it's just in fighting fair, really listening and just trying to hear and understand your partner's point of view and knowing that it's just not all about you, but it's about them as well. And so I think that's a big piece of it. I think that's
that active listening component, which is really hard. It's
Mm.
something that we have to practice.
Yeah.
We can't just do it. And
Absolutely.
so really learning how to do that correctly is important.
Yeah.
So in your practices, what have you seen as the top reasons that conflict arises? And Estrella, I'm going to have you go first on that one.
So I think the number one reason is communication. Most of our clients, come in and there's always a communication issue. And it's whether their inability to listen actively, whether it's their inability to express themselves in a loving way. But there's always some form of a communication issue that they have. And because they don't know how to communicate, what happens is all aspects of their marriage normally are affected. So if I'm feeling lonely, instead of me saying, hey, I'm feeling lonely right now, instead they say, oh, you're selfish or you're this or you're that. And they become critical of the other person. And now we're fighting, and so they don't know how to really express what they're feeling. And because of that, we now have conflict that arises in an unhealthy way. So now we're not learning how to manage it because we don't know how to talk to each other. And I think for me, what I see in my practice 9 times out of 10 is the core of it is they just never learned how to communicate. They never learned how to communicate. And that's the core of the issues that I see, for sure.
And Natalie, do you have anything you'd like to add as well?
Yeah, so just very similar language. I talk about interactive styles. So exactly what you're talking about in regards to communication. So they're lacking awareness of their interactive styles and how they're triggering themselves, let alone their partners as well. So we're familiar with being passive, being a passive aggressive, being aggressive, or being assertive, and helping them really break down what each one of those mean, how you switch just a small component and you can quickly be passive aggressive, right? Versus assertive, and really incorporating the communication styles, communication skills. I mean, I just have to piggyback off you. I mean, that's perfect. Communication is the number one issue, because a lot of times people will say, oh, it's, our money management or our parenting or, our sex life. And it's like, okay, but really when that's up here, but when you go to the root of it, it's the communication, and it's, knowing your personality style. It's knowing what your needs are, what are your unmet needs, right? And so it goes back to the key of communication versus what's your presenting problem. And people always have a one-liner. And I just want to erase it and put communication, and everything else follows underneath that. So
Right.
I agree
All
100%.
goes back. Yeah, it all goes back to that. And that's one of our 3 C's.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We have commitment, communication, and conflict resolution.
Yeah.
And if you can learn how to communicate well, you can cut out so much of the conflict.
Right.
Absolutely.
Are you tired of feeling like you're living with a roommate instead of a lover? Do you miss the days when you were completely into each other, intellectually, emotionally, and physically? The truth is, many couples are struggling behind closed doors. Putting on a brave face for the rest of the world is exhausting. If you want to get back your joy, return to thriving, and take pleasure in your marriage, then Kickass Couples Coaching and Matthew P. Hoffman are here to help. Join us alone or with your partner and start taking steps towards overcoming the pain-filled obstacles and improving your relationship right now. For a limited time, we're offering a free relationship assessment call. Go to MatthewPHoffman.com/coaching to book your free call now, so you can start making real changes in your most important relationship today. So I want to kind of do a follow-up on the next step. So Natalie, when you think about, you guys are talking about both about communication, and I totally agree with that concept. And most people, we talk about mind reading, and that's so impossible to know or think unless you talk about it and ask those questions for understanding. Have you seen a lot of difference between men and women on friction points, or do you think it's like we're all people, we're all the same? Or is it fair to categorize and say, I don't believe in superlatives, like all men do this or all women do that. I don't believe it. But have you seen, in your experience, are there some different friction points that as a man I can be aware of, or as a woman Kim can be aware of, so that we can kind of get ahead of some of those things?
Yeah, so I agree with you. Not all men or all women, excuse me, would align with each camp. However, I hear more oftentimes than not from men, I don't feel respected. And from women, I often hear, I don't feel loved and cared about. So just from what I've heard, what I've seen in my practice over the last 18 years, I've heard that common theme. I don't feel respected. I don't feel loved / cared about. And so really chipping away, because it's so broad. Oh my word, I don't feel loved. Okay, how do I match that? Or I don't feel respected. It's just so broad. So those are the 2 I would say that I see the most of. And of course, it can be different depending on the male or female or the relationship dynamic. But those 2, I would say, Matthew, are the most common I hear.
Okay. And then Estrella, what about you? Anything different? Or are you seeing some of the same themes in the people you're working with?
Yeah, I think so for a lot of them. And again, like we said, we can't necessarily say all men, but I do believe that, especially culturally, a lot of men are taught, not to express their feelings, and so now when you have conversation between a husband and a wife, a lot of times what happens is the man, shuts down, or he doesn't know what he wants to say or how to say it. And you have a wife who was like, okay, but I want to talk about this now, or this is how I feel. And so she's over expressive about her feelings and her emotions, and he's shut down, which then in turn causes him, of course, to be flooded and frustrated, and it causes him to shut down. And, she's just kind of looking like, I want to have this conversation right now. And it just is not happening. And so now I think those are friction points for both of them, because she feels unheard. She feels as if she's being ignored in that moment. And he feels overwhelmed because he also feels like, hey, she's not respecting my space, and she's not respecting how I feel in this moment. And so I think that piece of it, a lot of times between men and women, can differ. Obviously, we know that's not all men and all women, but for the majority of it, that's what I see a lot of in my practice.
And then kind of following up on that, I'm gonna do a turn the table thing here. So Natalie, I'm gonna ask you to the issues that Estrella brought up. So how do our listeners, if the man is like, I just don't want to talk about it, and the woman's like, man, let's go, let's get it out here, you're not avoiding me again, what do we do so that does not turn into conflict, but honors both people in that situation?
So I really like to lean into emotion focused therapy at times in regards to that. Excuse me. And I challenge my couples. A lot of times they'll start talking to me, and I'm always like, "Oh, I'm just here
To
supporting you. I'm
me.
walking alongside you."
Don't
I
look at
always
me.
just point. I'm
Tell
like, "Here
her,
you
tell
go."
him.
Or if it's Zoom, I literally will cover up the camera, and they'll start talking towards one another. And a question I always ask is, what message are you taking away from this? Or what do you hear her saying? What is the message that is being presented to help de-escalate? Because if you genuinely believe your partner has your best interest and you're partnered for a reason, what got you there? And so a lot of times it's being able to pause and reflect on, why have we made it 15 years, or what started this love interest with one another, and just being able to pause and say, wait, in this moment there's such passion between you two. Can you describe what that passion is about? And I will literally like interject and shift it, right? Oh, well, like this is my person, and I want them to get it. And oh, so you desire them to know your heart. You desire them to truly know you as 100% authentic and vulnerable.
Right.
Oh, well, I just need a minute. She's my person, but and just kind of coaching them through that. And so
Sure.
being able to just catch a nugget in session, Australia, I'm sure you do it all the time. You catch those nuggets, and we call it catching the bullet, right? Like I catch the bullet for my client, and and I hold it, and I don't allow it to penetrate their partner. And so you shift it to where it actually is a strength and a positive, and it draws them in to a more unified element of communication and a more intimate level of communication.
Sure. So now that's awesome. Good goal
I
there.
know, I
So,
love that.
so Estrella,
Catching the
Natalie
bullet.
talked about, right? She talked about the man doesn't feel respected and the woman doesn't feel valued, heard, understood, cherished. How do
Mhm.
you, when those two dynamics exist in the relationship, Estrella, what can somebody do to address them both and catch that bullet, like Natalie was saying?
Yeah, so I think one of the things is helping them to be able to talk about, number one, the why. So why don't you feel respected? Why don't you feel valued in this relationship? And so having them, of course, talk to each other about that and teaching them how to do that. And then also, where does that come from? Where does the idea of I need to be valued in this way? I need to be respected in this way. Where does that come from for them? And so as they're talking and they're getting to really understand the why of who they are and understanding what it is that they need in regards to respect and just being valued as they're talking. Number one, the hope is that they begin to see what the other person needs, because I love you, right? And as I love you and you're telling me that this is what you need, my hope is that, number one, in seeing that, I'm going to respect that. But the other thing is that I'm also going to ask you, well, how do I meet that? What is it that I need to do within even me to help respect that? A lot of times it could be, independence, or it could be, you're doing these actions, and these actions make me feel disrespected. So as I learn why this is making you feel disrespected, then for me, I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, okay, well, what can I do so you don't have that feeling anymore? And it doesn't mean that I have to completely change who I am or the core of who I am, but it may simply mean that I need to include you more. It may simply mean that I need to ask for your opinion. I may need to speak to you in a different way or in a different tone. But whatever that is, if that's something that I can do to meet you where you are in order for you to feel respected, then as your spouse, then I'm going to try to do that. So my aim would be, or my goal would be, really to just allow them to be able to hear each other and really be able to understand why the other person does not feel valued and respected, and then see if we can find a way to meet that between the two.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we know that there's going to be conflict and sometimes arguing in a relationship. But Natalie, what are some things that we can do to be proactive, to avoid conflict? What are some things that we can be doing so we don't even go down that road?
Mm.
So I think it's important to make sure that you are doing your self-care. I mean, naturally, like having healthy time for you to just reflect in life and relationships, the highs, the lows, what's your high of the day, what's your low of the day, what are the challenges, kind of just do a self-assessment, like a heart check. I call it a heart check. So just kind of a heart check. What's filling my cup? I think of, our emotions, and if it's too full, it's going to overflow and like burn those around me. And so what's filling my cup? Are they heavy emotions? Are they lighter emotions?
Right.
And if there's tons of heavy emotion and they say partner all around it, well, what do I need to do to sift through that? Right. And it's having those healthy, proactive conversations. It doesn't have to be in the midst of a conflict. It could be on a walk with my spouse and saying, hey, babe, I was just thinking about this today, or I felt some type of way in this situation, or this conversation didn't rest well with me. I just wanted to share a little bit more about it. We're in a different posture and a position in sharing. And I'm not being aggressive in it. It's not in the heat of the moment. It's thought out. It's intentional. There's times where we just naturally do a check-in. I encourage couples weekly, daily would be ideal, just to do a relationship check-in, truly where it's like, hey, how are we greeting? How are we leaving? How are we checking in throughout the day? But then having at least one day during the week where you're really chiseling out some quality time with your partner to just feel the temperature of the relationship, to pour in, to play, to have fun. And I believe when you do those things, conflict just turns into conversations. You're just having natural conversations. There's times when I'm in the right space, I will say, hey, E, what can I work on? What can I work on in this relationship? What could I do better? What would you like me to do differently? But I have to make sure that I am self-aware and teaching clients how to be self-aware, to be in that posture, in that position, to be open to what can come. But I also have trust with my partner, and we've worked on communication skills to share that without an attack, right? So those are some things I would recommend, but it has to start within you, and to be able to evaluate where you're at, because sometimes conflict happens and it's not even about our partner. It's about something through our day, or it's a conversation we had with maybe a family member, and it spills over into our relationship because we didn't handle it well there, so it's important to evaluate yourself first and then create healthy space to have free conversation without that pressure of having a resolution.
So self-care, proactive communication, and I heard you slide fun in there, which I believe is really important. Estrella, do you have anything you want to tack on to that?
Honestly, I'm like ditto, because that probably would have been my answer.
Yes.
But no, I would say that. And then, just coming back to any solutions that you came to before. So any compromises, but just really coming back again, saying, how are we doing with this? Do I need to work on this anymore? Being very mindful of not being defensive, because a lot of times, even in those check-ins, when the other person says, hey, well, you kind of did this week, we have to be mindful of not being defensive, but again, being open-minded and saying, okay, well, tell me what you mean by that. Explain to me a little more what that looked like, as opposed to, no, I didn't do that, which is the first thing that we want to do, because we, in no way, shape, or form, did we hurt our spouse's feelings, or, did we not listen to what they had to say? So just really, I think being mindful during those check-in times of not being defensive, but being open to listening and open to change, of course, if change is needed. So I think those are some of the things.
I feel you on that, because I know that we'll start out with great intention, and then all of a sudden these little hairs go up on the back of my neck, and the defensiveness starts to creep in. And so you have to work on it. You have to be aware.
Absolutely.
Curbing those negative desires to get back, or, oh, you got me, I'm going to get you back. Right.
Yeah.
So it kind of leads me to another great question, I think. And so, is it reasonable, and Estrella, I'm going to start with you on this one. Is it reasonable for one partner to expect, or even hope for, their partner to change their stance on issues they differ on? Is that a reasonable expectation? Or is it, oh, I just got to accept them? How do we, because couples, right? I mean, some of us have long-standing issues, or something is so important to us, and can't you just see something of what I see? Is that an unreasonable or reasonable expectation? How do we navigate that in a relationship?
So to be very honest, I think it depends on where the issue stems from. If we're talking about something materialistic or something where there is a solution to it, there's a strong possibility that I can hope that you're going to agree to get the car that I want, or you're going to change your stance on, the fact that maybe I want to go to a class on Tuesday nights as opposed to, Fridays. But I think when we're talking about something that's really tied to the core of who a person is, tied to their values, their beliefs, even especially when we're talking about like religious beliefs or, just those. Sometimes that's a little harder when it comes to them actually changing their stance on it. Now, would they be willing to possibly still compromise? Maybe. But I don't know if in those situations it's as easy to say that they're going to change their stance. I always think we can hope. There is hope out there. But there are some things that I believe that there are times where we just have to accept our partner's differences. And there are things that, there may be things that they can change. But again, I think it just depends on what the core of that is. And that's what you have to find out. You have to find out what is tied to their stance. And if you can find that out, then I think you'll get your answer, to be very honest.
How would you add on to that, Natalie, about the hope of change on issues that you're passionate about, but maybe your partner just isn't?
So I believe just with Gottman and his awesome research where he talks about when you basically paraphrasing, when you pick a partner, you're literally settling for a set of problems, right? Like, so you're picking a partner that naturally is different than you. Obviously, there's only one of us. And so you're picking a set of problems. Each person comes with that. And so some it's yield to win, right? It's like you can create a win-win, a lose-lose, or you know what, I'm going to yield to win. It's really not in my wheelhouse. It's not a core issue for me. It might be something that my partner's passionate about, and I'm either way, so I can just lean in and go with that direction. But I believe it's important to recognize the core, right? Like, is it come from a core wound? It is a childhood unmet need. Is it a trauma-based response? Is just trying to have a deeper understanding. But to expect a partner to fully change in certain areas, we're not that person. And it's understanding where it stems from. I agree 100%. I mean, I really don't have much to add to it other than really having a heart of curiosity. And if we learn more about where it comes from as a partner, we can be more understanding, right? Versus defensive in that. So
yeah. So what I hear you both saying is the goal is to find the understanding of why, not to find out what they believe and try to get them to change their belief. Because if it's the core of who they are, then you're saying you got to change to make me happy, who you are, and that's an unreasonable request. It sounds funny when you even say it that way, but I think a lot of people are kind of falsely holding on to, our daughter's in a serious relationship and our son's in one too, and I say, you know what? You're owning the set of problems you have, and you got to get comfortable with it, because you're never going to find something where there is no problem.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you struggling to maintain the emotional and physical intimacy you once shared? Do you feel like you're spending more energy finding fault and tearing your partner down instead of magnifying their good and building them up? Don't worry, you're not alone. Many couples are struggling behind a forced smile and an inauthentic happiness. You feel drained, unheard, and more often than not, unappreciated. The good news is it's not too late to rekindle the flame and strengthen your bond. I'm offering a free relationship assessment call to help you take the first step towards revitalizing your relationship and reaching your own relationship nirvana. Whether you come alone or with your partner, I'm here to help you create the space for a more fulfilling and satisfying relationship. Don't wait any longer. Make the changes you need to thrive. Book your free call today at matthewphoffman.com/coaching. And let's get started on your journey to a kick-ass relationship.
So I want to talk a little bit about stressors of relationships. And one of the big ones, and I think our listeners will appreciate this, is parenting. Conflict than within parenting. And maybe it's because we have two different parenting styles. And so for couples that do have different parenting styles, how would you approach this with them in navigating that? And maybe,
So
yeah,
go ahead.
Natalie, go ahead. Yeah, I was
Okay. No, you're good.
Okay.
So I believe it's so important in relationships to accept influence from our partners, right? So we are all raised in, I have my experiences of how I was raised or disciplined. My husband, my friends, everybody I know has their own experiences. And so it's so important to stay open to influence, right? Versus I'm right because I'm me and I'm right, and my partner's right because he's always right, right? It's accepting influence of one another. And to me, it's when you are in such a gridlock of conflict, especially with parenting, being able to bring in a third party, bringing in a therapist, bringing in a coach, like really, hey, help us navigate this. What are some great tools? What are some great resources? There's so much out there. Everybody has an opinion about everything. And it's being able to say, hey, what is my core belief? What is my goal? And what is discipline? There's a big difference between discipline and punishment, right? So being able to talk about that and what do we want to teach? And it's different for every generation, but being able to say, hey, I want to learn, right? I was a parent for 10 years prior. Actually, I was a parent 15 years before Eric became a parent. And so in my mind, I'm like, oh, I've done this before, but man, I had so much to learn, and he added so much to a different parenting style. And I added so much to his belief system because we stayed open to influence. We were open to being influenced by the person that we partner with because we trust them, right? Because I know him. So I'm able to lean into that. So accepting influence is huge, and bringing in a third party, more oftentimes than not, is a part of the system of support that's created in parenting.
I love hearing you say that because I think that bringing in help is important. And many times we think that we're weak if we do that, when in essence, like you said, there's so much information out there. We have so much to learn and grow from. By bringing in help and support, it can really take our relationship, our family dynamic in a different direction if we're open to that. Estrella, would you have anything to add? Any other suggestions for us?
Yeah, I think, and just a little bit about what Natalie said also, but really being able to understand again, where the other person is coming from, why they believe so strongly on their parenting skills. A lot of times, what I've heard a lot of my couples say is, well, I turned out okay. So the way that my parents, they parented me just fine,
Yeah.
So then I'll say to them, well, if you turned out okay and she turned out okay, is it possible that we can talk about how your parents parented and then maybe bring those two styles together? And so we'll talk a lot about the fact that I think, when we talk about compromise, the fear is that I have to sacrifice everything. So I can't have my parenting style in this at all, and you just want everything to be your way. And so we just take a moment and I'll say, hey, okay, well, what are the things that you absolutely have to have? What are the things that you have to have? What are you not flexible on? And then let's talk about how we compromise. Let's try some things. And then if they don't work, then we go back to the drawing board and we try again.
Sure.
So, just really taking a moment and just even being open to looking at the other person's parenting styles, because a lot of times they won't do that. They'll just say, well, it's not my way, so I don't want to do it. And I'm like, well, have we even listened to what your spouse says and the things that they want to do? So I think being open, definitely being open to podcasts, being open to, a lot of times I'll have couples that will, and I'll say, why don't you go listen to this? Why don't you go take a parenting class over here together? And then see if you can take some of that and then put that into what you're doing at home. And so, again, agreeing with Natalie, third party obviously is always a great way to go as well. So, but just really listening and being able to find a way, helping them to find ways, I think, to compromise can be helpful.
Yeah. And I would even add to that, I'm not a therapist, but I know what we did before even having children was we really talked about a philosophy, and we really worked together on finding a way that we could raise our kids in a way that we both, agreed on. So we had this foundation already to start with. Not saying it was perfect, but it really helped a lot.
Yeah. I think I heard you, Estrella, talked about it, and I think you both have mentioned the whole idea of compromise. And I think a challenge a lot of couples get into, or I've heard as well in some of the coaching I've done, is, I feel like I'm always the one compromising. I'm always giving in. I, right? And so what do you do if there's a couple out there that's going, okay, I feel like I'm rolling over and I'm a doormat, and they're totally happy with me being the one that gives in, or that leans in or agrees to yield, as Natalie said earlier. So if there's an imbalance, and I'm not talking about I feel there is, but if there's a genuine imbalance in a relationship where one person is like, oh my gosh, I'm always compromising and it's not coming the other way, what steps can that person who feels that way do to kind of maybe turn the ship or get some give and take in that area? And Natalie, I'll ask you to kind of go first on that.
Okay. So I just want to make sure I heard you right. So how to basically empower the other partner that is constantly giving in or feeling like they're compromising more?
Yeah, if I feel like
Okay.
I'm always compromising and I'm losing, and I'm never getting it the compromise the other way. So when there is a lopsided nature
Mhm.
in the relationship where the other partner either isn't considering, may not be that they're not willing, it's just they never think to, because they're happy because all their needs are being met and they're always getting what they want when there's discussion.
And so it's really important to be able to check within yourself. If you're that partner that's always giving in, what is that about? Is there a codependent dynamic there? Is there a fear of conflict? Are you lacking in some of those skills to be assertive, to recognize that your rights and opinions are equal to others? What does that equality wheel look like in your relationship? If you're feeling some type of way that you're always the one giving in and you're always the one compromising and your partner's just coasting, it's important to reflect, why is that? And do I feel responsible for my partner and for their happiness? Or do I feel responsible to this relationship as unity, as an equal half? Versus, well, he gets to carry it or she gets to carry it, and I'm always meeting their needs, And so just a lot of self-reflection, and then obviously empowerment, being able to recognize, do I even carry my own opinion as equal to others? Is there a codependent style? And again, that equality wheel is really important in relationship.
Love that concept. Estrella, what would you add to that?
So one, I would definitely agree on that. A lot of times when I have clients or couples that'll come into the office, and a lot of times one of the spouses will say, well, we always end up doing what the other one wants to do. And I'll say, well, did you voice your opinion? You've gotten to this place in your marriage where you feel like, okay, everything is what, and I'm just going to say in this example, what he wants. Everything is what he wants. We always do what he wants. But then I'll ask the husband and I'll say, well, tell me a little about that. And he'll say, well, I'll ask her and she'll say whatever you want to do. She'll say whatever, and so, so then I'm like, okay, well, are you telling him what you want? You've been married for 20 years. And in 20 years, have you actually shared with him what your dreams are, what your goals are? Have you shared with him what you want so he can actually allow you to say what it is, or, so that you all can compromise? And so I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is, it really makes me think of the art of compromise. And looking at the art of compromise, being able in the beginning to ask each other again, what are you not flexible on? So when we talk about compromise and we make this compromise at the end, what is it that you actually have to have so you don't feel like you're sacrificing everything? So if there's something that you're inflexible on, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about why it's important to you. We'll talk about, all of the reasons why it has to stay. If we're buying a house and you say, I absolutely have to have, a garage. Well, why do you have to have this garage? Let's talk about it. Because if I can hear that as your spouse and I understand why that's inflexible, then there's a very strong possibility we'll be able to keep those inflexible spaces in the compromise. And then maybe the other person won't feel as if they're always sacrificing everything.
Right.
But I think you got to be able to share what you're inflexible about.
Sure.
All right, I'm going to spice it up a little bit.
Ooh.
I am going to ask.
I like spicy.
I'm going to ask each of you, and Estrella, I'm going to have you go first. Conflict can arise when there are certain expectations around sex. Is it too much? Is it too little? And I think that we even have friends who the wife has a husband on a schedule. So you hear that. And how can we really minimize disagreements surrounding these expectations, and so that the conflict doesn't arise and we're not having, this is an emotional, intimate time. We don't want conflict seeping into these areas. So how do we minimize that?
So I think I will say, honestly, I think the biggest thing is that we don't talk about it. People do not talk about sex. They don't talk about it before they get married. They don't talk about it when they get married. We have these expectations in our minds, and we don't talk to the other person about it at all. And so then when our expectations are not met, then we become frustrated, we become irritated, and all of those things. And I can speak for to say culturally, especially in religious veins, in a sense, people are told, go get married. You're supposed to get married, but then they don't tell them you need to have conversation about the intimate part of your relationship. You need to have conversation about what your sexual expectations are with your spouse. And so when we don't talk about it, somebody is going to be frustrated. Somebody is going to feel like they're not getting their needs met because there is no conversation. And so how can I actually meet your needs if I don't truly know what they are? And I think that's a big part of relationships, not sharing what the expectation is. I think sometimes people can even be a little shamed about what they want and when it comes to sex and marriage and sex in their relationship. And so they hide and they don't tell the other person what it is that they truly want. They may feel like they don't want the other person, like, especially if the other person can't meet their needs in a certain way, then now I don't want, my spouse to feel as if they're not enough. And so I think there's a lot of emotions that are tied to that as well. But I think, again, the main thing is that you have to talk about it. And I will say also, you got to know what you want. Because when the other person asks you and says, hey, well, what is it that you want? You have to know enough about yourself to be able to say, this is exactly what I need from you. And not be afraid to say that. Be okay with it. This is your spouse. Like, I tell people, this is your lifetime partner. So if you want to be pleased, if you want to get your expectations met, then you better share it with them, because
I can't help you.
Nobody else is going to meet that expectation. So if you're going to share it with somebody, you figure out a way to have that conversation with your spouse. So each person's needs can be met.
Yeah. Open, vulnerable communication.
Yeah.
Natalie, I'm sure you have more to add to that.
Well, I love what you said about
conversation.
Such a great topic. It's one of my favorite conversations. So to address with couples and being able to say, knowing your body, right? Knowing your body, your partner needs to know their body, and then you guys get to explore your bodies together. So it requires vulnerability. It requires safety in relationship.
Yeah.
So it's so important for couples to feel safe to be able to have these intimate, vulnerable, exposed conversations. And so I'm big into play. I use that all the time, like being able to play outside the bedroom so that you can, allow that to be strong so that your play in the bedroom is even stronger, right? So where you can laugh together, you can, laugh at that. Okay, that wasn't the position I was thinking of, or that actually didn't turn out the way that I was hoping, and allowing couples to talk about that and creating normalcy in your office. And there's times where, I can just see such shame or based off of some of the upbringings of my clients where, they're very uncomfortable. I'm like, oh, what are you doing to safeguard? They're like, oh, we're trying to, have some healthy boundaries prior to marriage. We're doing premarital counseling. And so I'm like, all right, so what's off limits? And I'm just like, straight up, like, what's off limits? And they'll start kind of like tippy toeing around. I'm like, okay, so are we saying no licking, no sucking, no nudity, no? And they're like, oh, like so uncomfortable. And I'm like, you guys, like, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about intimacy on a sexual level, but then being able to explore intimacy on other levels, which I'm sure we'll jump into a little bit later. But how to make it so solid that you have these conversations in the bedroom, and everybody has a sexual threshold, right? For some couples, they might say, okay, well, the husband wants to have sex 5 days a week, and the wife's like, I'm good with 2. Well, have these open conversations. Are you only wanting it 2 nights a week because you're so exhausted? Like, oh, a partner will say, oh, I love intimacy with my husband. I love sex with my husband. Okay, well, what's the 2 days a week about? Well, I'm drained. When the weekend comes, I feel carefree, but during the week, I have so much on my mind. So being able to have those conversations, wait, how do we tag team in life so that we can tag team in the bedroom and have fun, right? Well, okay, well, let's meet, compromise, and the husband's exhausted or the wife, vice versa. It's being able to understand each other's needs, their sexual thresholds, how to help meet those needs. Like, where do you feel you get to at a breaking point where maybe you look twice at a female, or maybe you're looking twice at a guy? Oh, well, when we don't have sex, X, Y, and Z, you're not responsible for your partner to keep him or her on track to be faithful in the relationship. It's just about knowing and having these authentic conversations. But again, it comes to exploration. Exploring yourself, exploring your partner, allowing it to be fun and flirty and playful, where it's more inviting versus a duty, right? To check off your list.
Yeah, that's a great concept.
We've also talked about with you how that, fulfilling the other kind of intimacies leads to, you might be on a schedule of 3 times a week, but, you get this big emotional just thing going on, and just, all of a sudden it leads to great sex, right?
Yeah.
Which is really special.
Yeah. It's funny, we've only tapped maybe half the questions
I
that we
know.
thought about for this episode.
We're already over an
and
hour.
we could go, I'd love to hang out with you guys
We need
all
a part
morning.
2.
But I know your day's not dedicated
this was
to
incredible.
us. You guys have been incredible and so open, and I get excited and I laugh and we have fun because it's so much good ground covered, and we want to be respecters as well. Estrella, if people want to learn more about you, about your practice, and then get in touch with you or the work that you're doing, where should they go and what should they do?
You can go to www.withoutlimitscounseling.com or www.starlevelcoaching.com. And then I'm also by name on Instagram and Facebook.
That's great. Well, we'll make sure we put those in the show notes. And Natalie, we have some friends and people in your area in Florida, and we've referred to you, and your dance card is full. And I know,
That's a good
the
thing.
good ones always are. But where can people get in touch with you and all the goodness that you got going on?
Yeah. And the 7 other therapists at our practice. So, I train therapists. I'm a clinical supervisor in the state of Florida. So I want to pour out into the next generation of counselors as well. So you can find me at www.lifetransformationcounseling.com. And on Instagram, it's the same. Facebook, it's the same, lifetransformationcounseling.com.
That's great. Well, so much fun to be with the two of you today. This is an important topic, and we got into some great issues and had some good discussion back and forth, because we really want our listeners, anybody that's with us, to understand what they can do to navigate some of the topics that we've gone through today. And it's been really fun. I've had a great time.
Yes. Thank you both so much.
Thank you so much. I'm always honored.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, we look forward to coming across you guys again. We are doing some fun stuff at Kickass Couples Nation. Estrella is one of our elite coaches, and Natalie, whether it's my daughter,
we wrangle her in when
maybe
we can.
it's squeezing my daughter into your practice for some more good training, who's behavioral therapist in Tampa. Yeah, we're going to call you up. But guys, we are so grateful. What a fantastic episode. We can't wait to share it. And we just want you guys in closing and all of our listeners to remember one thing.
Happily ever after doesn't just happen. It's on purpose.
Thanks for being with us, guys. We'll see you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's all we've got for this episode of the Kickass Couples Podcast. If you like the content of this show, you'll love Matthew's newly released book, Kickass Husband, Winning at Life, Marriage, and Sex. To receive a digital mini book of quotes and images from the book, All you have to do is rate this show and leave a review in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you tune in to listen. Then email us a screenshot of your review at podcast@kickasscouplespodcast.com, and we'll get it over to you right away. Until next time, remember, happily ever after doesn't just happen, it's on purpose.